Funding for this program was provided by Mrs. Donald D. Harrington. Additional funding for this season's Metropolitan Opera Presents television broadcast series is provided by Texaco, a supplier of new System 3 gasolines and other petroleum products. Texaco, star of the American Road, and your ticket to the Met for 50 seasons. Additional series funding is provided by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Charles E. Culpeper Foundation.
This is PBS.
Good evening. This is an SIU Night Report news break. I'm Jeff Williams. It's Halloween night. Is Carbondale's annual street party really over? We'll have a report. With less than a week until Election Day, the wife of Republican candidate for governor Jim Edgar was in southern Illinois today pushing to get the vote out. And Democrat Neil Hartigan brought his campaign message to Carbondale via satellite. In sports, it's round one of the state high school football playoffs. Brad Palmer has today's winners and losers. We'll have details on these stories and more, plus a look at weather in 30 minutes on the SIU Night Report.
Sunday night on Masterpiece Theater, the emotional conclusion to The Ginger Tree. Mary Mackenzie must flee a country at the brink of war.
Why should I want to go to America?
Because I cannot guarantee your safety.
While Count Kentaro remains behind.
As long as I am required by my country, I must serve.
Even if that country begins to go insane.
And a stranger emerges from the past. And Monday, take a look at the satellite sky on the American Experience. The launching of Sputnik turned science fiction into science fact and moved the Cold War into outer space.
It is quite possible that an aggressor nation that dominates space will then dominate the world.
See how this threat to national security created a mad rush to the moon.
Well, sure, I'd like to make sure we get there, but I'd also like to make sure we get back.
Sunday, Masterpiece Theater, and Monday, the American Experience.
Broadcasting from the campus.
Nightly Business Report is funded locally by Fyrick Shane Major Green, attorneys at law, providing comprehensive personal and business legal services for the community of Southern Illinois. Fyrick Shane Major Green offices are located at West Town Mall in Carbondale.
In our report, a massive loss for the nation's biggest corporation.
No records on Wall Street as the Dow ends with a modest decline.
The Nightly Business Report, made possible by Digital Equipment Corporation, the company that makes all your computers work as one. The $42 billion Franklin Group of Funds, one of America's major mutual fund organizations for over 43 years. Franklin funds are distributed nationwide by investment professionals. A.G. Edwards, member of the New York Stock Exchange, serving the investment needs of individuals and businesses through more than 400 offices nationwide. And by the financial support of viewers like you. NBR is produced in association with Reuters, the world's largest electronic publisher.
Good evening. General Motors moved today to counter the effects of a slowing auto industry, announcing it will permanently close 4 assembly plants. The nation's biggest company took a $2.1 billion charge to cover the costs of the shutdowns, resulting in a third-quarter loss of just under $2 billion. While the 4 plants to be formally closed have been idled over the past 3 years, GM says other plants and warehouses may be consolidated over the next few years. The $2 billion loss compares to profits of $517 million in the year-ago period. Without the charge, GM's earnings stood at $109 million. With me now to focus on these major developments at GM is Reuters correspondent Nicholas Platt reporting to us from Detroit. Nick, is this report a trick or a treat as far as the street is concerned, and what are analysts in Detroit saying about this report tonight?
Analysts are basically upbeat about it. They think it's going to help the company in the long term become more lean, become more competitive, keeps its costs down.
Is this the worst of the write-downs, or can we expect more of this sort of thing? What are your sources telling you there?
Well, they seem to think that this is the worst. The company is really trying to put a lot behind it now, and it's taken a big hit. And they seem to think that nothing much more is going to come anytime soon.
Excluding the restructuring charge, how are analysts interpreting GM's operating earnings for the third quarter, which are down considerably from the year-ago period?
Well, they believe that they're quite poor, especially in the North American Automotive Group, and that's due to incentive costs, it seems.
All right. Amid all of the recession fears these days, what are analysts saying about the outlook for America's auto industry?
They're saying that it's still quite iffy with the gas prices rising, the Persian Gulf situation, the economy weakening. The fourth quarter does not look good at this standpoint, according to analysts.
Among the big three car makers, what are analysts saying about which one is the most lean and mean at this point?
Well, I think they're starting to believe, or the consensus is emerging, that it's GM, and that Ford's results yesterday were quite disappointing, analysts said, and it looks like GM is getting its act together.
All right. As far as the others are concerned, are they facing serious trouble?
Well, they're all facing the same amount of trouble. It's just the question of who is the best prepared, and according to analysts, GM is the one who seems to be dealing with it the best now.
Nicholas Platt in Detroit, Reuters correspondent there. Thanks very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Higher energy prices boosted personal spending in September and cut into income growth and savings. The Commerce Department says consumer spending rose a hefty 1.1% from August levels, while personal incomes rose 0.5%. But after adjusting for inflation, personal income actually fell 0.3%. The imbalance led many consumers to dip into savings. That pushed the national savings rate to its lowest level in 3 years, only 3.5%.
One thing Americans didn't spend much money on last month was big-ticket items, and that left factory orders for that period virtually unchanged. The Commerce Department says factory orders edged up a mere 0.1% in September, marking the weakest rise since June. That follows a revised 1.7% rise in August orders. Higher prices at petroleum refineries boosted the September figure. Excluding petroleum, factory orders fell 1.1%.
Prices on Wall Street opened moderately higher today in a follow-through to yesterday's 18-point gain on the Dow Industrial Average. A firm bond market, along with strength in the U.S. dollar, supported stocks nicely up to noontime, when the Dow was up just over 12 points, with 7 stocks higher for every 5 lower. Light volume on the upturn and some disappointing earnings reports from such stalwarts as General Motors that you heard about undermined bullish conviction in afternoon trading, and by 3 p.m., the Dow fell to a quarter-point loss. Persistent selling in the blue-chip sector during the final hour pushed the Dow Jones Industrial Average to a closing loss of 5.69 at 2442.33. Theoretical high and low separated by some 56 points. Trading volume today moved up, well, not quite 3 million shares from yesterday's pace, still moderate in activity, and about 2 million more shares of down volume than up volume. The Dow Transport Index fell just over 2 3/4 points, but the utilities for the second day in a row better than a 2-point gain, indicating a lot of investors think interest rates might be coming down. The closing tick practically neutral, plus 39. Standard & Poor's 500, a small fractional loss, a large fractional loss for the 400, and a medium-sized fractional loss for the 100. The Commodities Research Bureau December Index moved up 0.60. New York Stock Exchange Index, a small fractional gain, same for the value line, and the Wilshire 5,000 up just over 1.5 points. Because most all of the economic reports out this morning gave further evidence of a slowing economy, the bond market moved higher in anticipation that the Federal Reserve might continue to lower interest rates, and the Fed's latest survey of the economy, known as the Beige Book, released at midday, confirmed economic growth was slowing and business confidence was on the wane in most parts of the nation. Against this background, bonds might have done better had it not been for a late rise in oil prices. Even so, tax-frees rose about 0.5 point. Corporates held steady. Longer-term governments closed up nearly 0.5 point, like the long treasuries up 14/32. And the Lehman Brothers Long Bond Index up 5.37. Fed funds all over the place. This is a weird Wednesday, bank settlement day. I'll be back shortly to show you where the action was on Wall Street today. Frank?
Thank you, Paul. The Treasury Department says it will auction off a record $34.25 billion worth of securities next week. The auction will refund maturing securities and raise close to $11 billion in new cash. As Scott Gervey reports from New York, anticipation kept many traders on the sidelines today.
It is a little spooky to have billions of dollars hanging over your head, but that is exactly what bond traders faced today as they waited for the Treasury to announce how much money it needs to borrow next week. The government needs to borrow massive amounts to fund the federal debt. A lot of that has been coming from overseas. But with high interest rates in Japan and Germany, traders say there will be little foreign participation in this refunding. However, they see an unusually high domestic demand for government securities.
What we have is private sector credit demands weakening and lenders cutting off riskier borrowers, so the availability of credit to private sources is limited in this weaker economic environment. And I think a lot of domestic lenders, banks and others, are going to be shifting in favor of Treasury issues. They want something safe, something that they can build up their liquidity positions with, and I think these Treasury offerings are going to be quite attractive.
In spite of the domestic demand, most analysts see long-term rates approaching 9%. They are now around 8 3/4. Compared to 1 year ago, short-term rates have come down more than 0.5%, but long-term rates have gone up nearly 1 percentage point. That will increase the government's borrowing costs, and crowded out of the market are those corporations which still plan to raise money through bond issues.
Spreads are getting very wide from the Treasury market to corporates. The corporate borrowers having to pay a substantial amount more than they would have had to pay about a year ago, 6 months ago. And it is creating, like I said, more demand for the U.S. Treasury securities at this point.
If the economy grows weaker in the months ahead, the interest rates will go lower. And the experts say that means this refunding could be a pretty good buying opportunity. Scott Gervey, NBR, New York.
The dollar closed higher in quiet trading. The U.S. currency jumped nearly 1.5 yen following a report. The Bush administration is concerned about the dollar's recent drop. The pound fell 1 1/3 cents against the greenback. Silver took a tumble today as a two-day rally ran out of steam. The December contract dropped 7 cents to close at $4.18 an ounce. Gold also fell while platinum moved higher. Traders called platinum's ability to shake off softening gold prices encouraging.
Oil prices closed higher after a late rally wiped out earlier losses. The December contract for light sweet crude rose 69 cents on the New York Mercantile Exchange to close at $35.23 a barrel. Prices dropped in earlier London trading. Meanwhile, a Reuters survey shows OPEC members have managed to make up for almost all of the shortfall caused by the international embargo against Iraq and Kuwait. The report estimates daily OPEC production at 22.3 million barrels per day, and production is expected to keep rising.
Developments in the Persian Gulf crisis continue to determine the direction of oil prices. Iraq's U.S. ambassador appeared to wave an olive branch today by calling for a negotiated settlement. But comments by President Bush that he has had it now with Iraqi abuse of American hostages appeared to increase tensions. The possibility of military action and its effect on oil supplies led a Senate panel today to take a closer look at the nation's strategic oil reserves. As Dennis Moore reports.
The president was talking hostages and hostility today.
And do you think I'm concerned about it? You're darn right I am. And what I'm going to do about it, let's just wait and see.
Iraq's ambassador was talking negotiations and oil.
Attacking Iraq will be catastrophic, but for what reason? You already have the oil.
But U.S. troops could never protect the entire Saudi oil industry in a war, and losing even a quarter of its output could be catastrophic economically.
I wouldn't be surprised if oil prices triple. And if we're looking at 33, I would not be surprised if we see $100 per barrel oil.
And the reason a panel of oil experts told a Senate hearing is fear. It's not irrational speculation on the futures market that's driven oil above $40 a barrel since the invasion, but the very rational fear by refiners and industrial users of a shortage that could put them out of business.
At the moment, there's literally no spare producing capacity in the world. If anything goes wrong, including a mechanical problem in the North Sea or in somewhere else, you'd have a shortage.
There's no actual shortage now, nor has there been one. But the economists say if the government had opened the Strategic Petroleum Reserve anyway, the reassurance could have kept prices in the 20s.
And therefore, if the window had been open at the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, they would not have pumped much oil.
Now it's too late. The military standoff means a standoff on price, too. And if that standoff turns into a war, then the economists say the best chance to avoid a price explosion is for the U.S., German, and Japanese governments to start pumping their reserve oil onto the world market, the way their central banks started pumping money into the world economy after the crash of '87. Dennis Moore, NBR, Washington.
Meanwhile, the West's energy watchdog, the International Energy Agency, says there's no need for such stock drawdowns yet. The IEA says increased oil supplies and lower demand have taken the pressure off oil markets. The IEA also says it will not send a representative to a meeting with OPEC next week. The United Nations is sponsoring the talks between oil-producing and consuming nations to discuss soaring oil prices. Citicorp says it expects to cut some 2,000 jobs from its corporate business unit by the end of next year. The nation's largest banking company is currently reorganizing its corporate banking business in a bid to cut costs by $250 million. The disclosure provides the first indication of the size of layoffs planned since the retrenchment began several months ago. Nearly half the cuts will come from overseas staff.
Well, second day running, a little loss on the Dow, following through on yesterday's 18-point drop. The industrial average down about 5 2/3 points, but the advanced decline ratio is practically in a standoff. Actually, 4 more stocks up than down, so the broader market did all right. 9 new highs, 132 new lows for the year. Topping the active list on nearly 8 million shares, Elcan Aluminum down 1/4. That's probably the beginning of a dividend play. It goes XD on November 14th, and it pays 28 cents quarterly, almost 6% yield. Chase Manhattan at 10 down 1/4. Unisys fell 1/4. No change in Citicorp. Philip Morris rose 3/8 of a point. Southern Company edged up in a shearing plow, down 1 3/4. There's some concern that its asthma drug, theophylline, could be harmful. That's not confirmed, but there's some doctors that are concerned about it. The Travelers up 3/4 of a point. It had nearly a $5 loss in the latest quarter, but operating earnings were sharply higher. General Motors edged up an 1/8 despite all that bad news. As you heard Frank say, some analysts think that they did the right thing. Tremont, when issued, down an 1/8. That's a spinoff from Baroid Corporation that started trading 2 days ago. American Telephone, among widely held issues, moved up 1/4, and so did Exxon. Exxon today announced it's boosting its dividend from 60 to 67 cents a quarter. General Motors E-Stock, that's the electronic data systems subsidiary, up a full point. Prudential Bache upgraded it from a hold to a buy and increased earnings estimates. IBM lost 7/8 today. Pennzoil moving up 2.5 points. Oppenheimer and Kidder Peabody Brokerages both had positive comments about Pennzoil. Toys R Us moved up 1 1/8. The company reported that in the third quarter, its same-store sales were up 1.6%. Overall sales up 15%. Finally, William Wrigley down 1/4 of a point, even though it reported slightly higher third-quarter earnings, a boost in its dividend from 22 to 25 cents quarterly, and an extra year-end dividend of 62 cents per share. Square D Company on takeover rumors, vague ones, up 2 1/4. Oryx Energy rose 2 full points. There was a rumor round that its 7.3 million share secondary offering might be canceled, but Morgan Stanley, which is apparently handling it, denied that rumor. Green Rehabilitation Group dropped 1 5/8. The company forecasting fourth-quarter earnings will only be about 9 to 12 cents, down from last year's 25 cents a share. First Brands tumbling 3.5 points. Its major shareholders, Metropolitan Life and First Boston, have ended talks with a potential buyer for First Brands. Tyco Laboratories stumbling 5 1/4. Negative comments coming from Merrill Lynch and Shearson Lehman. Shearson cut earnings estimates. Borden Incorporated, which fell 2.5 points yesterday, down another 1 7/8. Yesterday, Bear Stearns, Oppenheimer, and Merrill Lynch had negative comments about the stock. NASDAQ trading a smallest of gains, 0.01 in the index. Volume up some 9 million shares from yesterday's pace, and just about a standoff in the advanced decline ratio. The 100 index fell 0.88. Reuters Holdings topped the active list, dropping 3 points. The company said there'll be a 6-month delay in launching its Dealing 2000 foreign exchange trading system. It needs some more refinements. It also is going to cut 300 jobs, but it says 90 earnings will be 13% higher than last year's. Costco wholesale up 1 1/8, sharply higher earnings out. Microsoft dropped 1/8, Intel up a fraction, as was Apple Computer. MCI fell 5/8, fractional gains in Novell and U.S. Healthcare and Amgen and Adobe Systems. Adobe mentioned positively in the Herd on the Street column of today's Wall Street Journal. The Shirt Shed up 15/16. Signal Apparel is bidding $4 a share. Datron Systems fell 1 3/4. Second quarter loss of 10 cents a share versus 36 cents in earnings last year. Company also apparently has a legal problem with a federal contract. And Midcon Banks down 1 5/8. It had a loss in the fourth quarter of 22 cents versus earnings of 26 cents last year. Over the American exchange, a loss of just over 1/4 point in the market value index. Trading volume a little under 9 million shares. And 27 more issues down than up. Topping the active list for the second day running, Continental Air down 1/4 of a point, traded 690,000 shares. Olson Corporation, the temporary help service, up a point, no news. Also fell 1 5/8, no specific news there. That's the Wall Street wrap-up, Frank.
Thank you, Paul. A deadlock over farm trade is causing a 13-nation group of agriculture exporters to consider walking out of the current Uruguay round of world trade talks. Reuters reports a top Australian trade official says the group, including Australia, Canada, Brazil, and Argentina, is upset with the European community's failure to come up with a promised farm trade reform. The Europeans are under pressure to cut farm subsidies to lower barriers to world trade. And another sensitive issue has surfaced in the midst of these world trade talks. The European community is now planning to ban meat imports from the United States because of concern about the hygiene in American slaughterhouses. The EC's farm commissioner says U.S. pork imports would have to stop immediately and beef imports would be discontinued by the end of the year unless improvements deemed satisfactory by the Europeans were made.
While the European community is facing some problems, two members are coming together, literally. A small hole linking two sides of a tunnel deep below the English Channel is the first step towards tying Britain to France and the rest of the continent. Reuters correspondent Steen Stovall has more from London.
There were no official celebrations for this breakthrough. That will happen in 5 weeks' time, when construction workers meet face-to-face, 15 miles out, underneath the English Channel.
It means that the risks are reduced. We can now actually see that the tunnel is going to happen.
This is Europe's largest construction project. It's being built by a private company called Eurotunnel. But things have not always gone smoothly. Costs have risen steadily. 2 years ago, the total cost was put at $9.5 billion. Today, it's said to be more than $15 billion. Eurotunnel has already spent all the money raised from its bank creditors and shareholders. It's now trying to raise a further $5 billion. Eurotunnel insists the project will be a commercial success. It expects to earn nearly $700 million in the first year.
There's no doubt elements of it were underestimated, and the complexity and difficulty of doing it were underestimated by some of the people who sponsored it. So they've had to step back and, as it were, rebuild their effort to a higher level and get it done, and they have.
Scheduled for completion in 1993, the project will link England at Dover to France at Calais. It incorporates 3 tunnels, 2 for trains and a third as a service tunnel. When completed, it will take a little over 3 hours to travel from central London to Paris by train. The connection under the English Channel is an engineering dream come true. It also has enormous symbolic value in the construction of a united Europe. Steen Stovall of Reuters for NBR, London.
In business briefs tonight, Eastman Kodak reports a third-quarter loss of $206 million after taking a charge of nearly $910 million because of a patent infringement award to Polaroid. The loss was actually smaller than many analysts expected, and Kodak stock gained a point and a quarter to close at 39 3/4. Control Data Corporation has been awarded a 10-year, $850 million contract to provide a new global communications network for the Canadian Armed Forces. That contract is the largest in the company's history. Control Data stock closed at down a quarter at 8 1/4. And a painful announcement today from the Michelin Tire Corporation in Greenville, South Carolina. The company announced a restructuring of its North American operations. As a result, 600 to 900 American jobs will be eliminated. Coming up, Lester Thoreau looks at the effectiveness of the economic boycott against Iraq. The Soviet state of Russia says it has begun its 500-day plan to turn its economy into a market system. The move could set the Soviet Union's most powerful republic on a collision course with Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev. The Russian parliament overwhelmingly approved the measure, giving the republic full control of all of its resources. The new law would also make agreements with foreign companies dealing with those resources invalid unless they're approved by the Russian Federation.
Meanwhile, the Soviet Union is offering a potential $2 billion of oil to Western companies for a joint exploration venture. Soviet energy officials told business leaders in Houston that the areas to be explored hold nearly 6 billion barrels of oil. That's about 1/5 of the oil in North America's largest field. 9 major companies in the United States and elsewhere, and 6 independent oil companies are negotiating with the Soviets.
drop in home prices and slightly higher incomes made buying a home more affordable in the month of September. The National Association of Realtors says its housing affordability index rose from August levels to its highest level in nearly 2 years. The national median home price dropped $2,800 to $94,300. But fears of recession, slow growth, and shaky consumer confidence still kept buyers out of the market.
At a campaign stop in Alexandria, Virginia today, President Bush conceded to reporters that the United Nations-led embargo of Iraq has not been as effective as he had hoped. The statement comes as no surprise to tonight's commentator, Lester Thoreau, Dean of MIT's Sloan School of Management.
President Bush says an economic embargo is going to get Saddam Hussein out of the Middle East. History, psychology, and economics all say that is very unlikely. The history is clear. Economic boycotts always leak. If we can't stop drug smuggling in the United States, of course we can't stop smuggling in the Middle East, where there are thousands of miles of borders on the other side of the world. The British tried to boycott the Germans in World War I, and it failed. The Germans tried to boycott the Russians in Leningrad in World War II, and the people in Leningrad simply ignored them and fought on. Economics is just as clear. Any society economically has the capability of simply doing without. Take modern medicine. Modern medicine's nice. Certain individuals will die if you don't have modern medicine, but populations survive. No population needs modern medicine to survive. He can just get along without medicine for a period of time. Or food. Any society has an enormous ability to eat less. We eat grain processed through a cow. If we don't process it through a cow, 1 pound of grain eaten directly will do the equivalent of 5 pounds of grain given to that cow. And if I slaughter the cow and eat it, and I save that grain, I have the capability of reducing my food consumption by a factor of 4. When I do that and plant every backyard and every front yard and every cotton field to grain, I can be self-sufficient in food, even though I now import 80% of my food within a year. Psychology says the same thing. You and I don't have any capability of watching starving children on television every night when we're the people starving them. Yet if you want a boycott to be effective, you've got to be willing to starve children. 50% of the population of Iraq is under 18 years of age. If the rest of the world feeds that 50%, there's plenty of food left in Iraq for the 50% who are adults. And in some sense, at Helsinki, President Bush and Mr. Gorbachev gave away the game because they said we will not starve children in Iraq and we will in fact feed children in Iraq. But if you're feeding children in Iraq, you're not getting Iraqi troops out of Kuwait. I'm Lester Thoreau.
Recapping tonight's top stories, General Motors posted a $2 billion loss for the third quarter, including a $2.1 billion charge to pay for the permanent shutdown of 4 assembly plants.
The bulls get spooked on Wall Street as the Dow Jones Industrial Average loses nearly 6 points, ending at 2,442.33.
And looking ahead to tomorrow, we'll be talking on the record with Leo Melamed of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And now for tonight's last word, here's Paul.
Despite government efforts to close loopholes, a new report from the Internal Revenue Service shows many of the wealthiest Americans still manage to pay little or no income taxes. Of the 500,000 couples and individuals who reported income of more than $200,000 for 1988, about 500 paid no taxes at all. Another 9,000 paid less than 5%. Most were able to offset taxes with deductions for interest paid or business or farm losses. The report points out that some of the non-taxpayers could be moved back onto the tax rolls following audits. Frank, looks like they finally caught up with you.
I don't know, Paul. Maybe they should go trick-or-treating and have better luck. And that wraps up this edition of NVR for Wednesday, October 31st.
For all of us, good night.
This program is produced in association with Reuters, the world's largest electronic publisher, which provides the nightly business report with news, market data, and communication services worldwide. And is made possible by A.G. Edwards, providing personalized financial services and investment advice to individuals and businesses. A.G. Edwards, a century-old tradition of service to investors. Franklin Group of Funds, with more than 1,700,000 shareholders and 55 different funds. Franklin has been helping investors reach their financial goals since 1947. Digital Equipment Corporation, with network application support to make all your computers work as one. And by the financial support of viewers like you. For a transcript of this program, please send $4 check or money order to NBR Transcripts, WPBT, P.O. Box 2, Miami, Florida 33261-0002. Please include the date of the broadcast.
Coming up on the SIU Night Report, as classes resume this Halloween, students are converging on the Strip in Carbondale tonight.
And the governor's race continues to heat up. Democratic candidate Neil Hartigan campaigned in Carbondale today via satellite.
In sports, the Illinois high school football playoffs got started tonight. I'll have highlights from 2 area games.
I'm Jeff Williams.
I'm Jared Erd. We'll have these stories plus a look at the local weather forecast next on the SIU Night Report.
Next time on Austin City Limits, Marcia Ball.
Oh, baby, I'm a red hot. Yeah, baby, I'm a red hot. Oh, honey, I can't stop. Can't stop.
And some hot Cajun from Beausoleil. Thursday night at 9.
Hello, I'm Louis Rukeyser, inviting you to join me for the next edition of Wall Street Week. And my guest will be one of the mightiest movers and shakers of the financial world of the 90s, Richard Jenrette, the boss of Equitable Life and a key player in this beleaguered and rapidly changing industry. Let's see if we can't move and shake some profitable answers that might help you become richer by the year 2000.
Friday night at 7:30.
You're watching WSIU TV, Channel 8, Carbondale.
Good evening. It's Halloween night, and there may be ghosts and goblins lurking in the area, but how about on South Illinois Avenue in Carbondale?
Today not only marks the Halloween holiday, but also SIU students' first day back to